Welcome to a special episode of Let's Talk Tax. We are halfway through the season, and we've covered everything from tax planning and incentives to leadership, growth, and building stronger CPA firms. But as we look back through every episode, something interesting stood out. Whether we were talking with firm leaders, tax specialists, or business advisors, everyone kept coming back to the same idea. The firms that create the most value aren't necessarily the ones that know the most. They're the ones asking better questions, having better conversations, and staying engaged with clients long after tax season ends. So today, we're revisiting some of our favorite moments from the season 3. These aren't just popular clips, they're conversations that challenge the way we think about serving clients and growing a practice. Let's get started.
My point is, I think we as an industry, we get so inundated with just what's on our daily plate. Sometimes we lose track of, if we don't bring this opportunity now, it may be another year before the client can actually realize any tax savings.
And I think that's something we need to really think about and really change the kind of the dynamic of how people talk about it. We've seen that change in the CPA industry over the last 20 years that we've been working in it, where we've seen that people are starting to get out from behind their desk during tax season and go meet with their clients and consult with them. But we've also seen the change from tax season being a end of January to April 15th timeline to tax season's now an annual thing. And we really need to look at that tax planning, that tax opportunity. Where are the ways that we can save money? And we don't walk away from it on April 15th. If anything, we dive back into it on April 16th. We dive back into where are the opportunities that maybe we missed out on last year, or maybe they haven't missed out on them yet. Just because you filed a return doesn't mean we can't open that return back up. Doesn't mean we can't look at it. Doesn't mean we can't pull something forward. Doesn't mean we've walked away from the property tax. Now, we'll say property tax is probably that one area where if you miss that window, you're kind of out of luck for another year.
Sure.
And so I think that's a critical one that we need to look at, but we want to almost take this time and reassess and go, okay, what did we do? And we do it as a firm. I know we're sitting down we have our annual retreat right after April 15th. And some of the things that we do is we go through and go, what did we do well? What can we do better? And how do we make sure that we're working for our clients in the best way possible? And it's a great time to reassess as a CPA firm and do the same thing.
If there's one takeaway from that conversation, it's that opportunity doesn't disappear on April 15th. It often starts on April 16th. But recognizing opportunity requires more than reviewing last year's tax return. It means understanding where your clients are headed next. In one of our favorite conversations this season, we talked about one of the biggest missed opportunities in the CPA world, growth conversations.
So what are some of the questions that should be asked as a business is thinking about, okay, I'm thinking about expanding. Or maybe it's expanding in the state I'm in. Maybe it's expanding somewhere else. What are some of those key questions that really they're thinking about that the CPA firm might not even know about?
I know from our standpoint, we actually just had a call just this morning, ironically enough, that a longtime client of a CPA had mentioned before. The CPA had asked the question, yes, what are you looking to do in the future? And they said, well, we have to find a new place. We have to expand a new building sometime in the future, but we're just not sure when. And so the CPA would continually follow up with them, just asking that question at the common points, the points in time that you talked about, Brian. Lo and behold, after 9 months of following up, we finally get to a point where they say, we found a building and we're getting ready to move forward with it. So thankfully, we're still in front of that process. But if we had just waited till after tax season and even after a little bit further into the summertime, we probably would have missed out on that opportunity. And at this point in time, for this particular client, we're probably looking at north of $1 million in incentives just off the bat. We're still collecting details on the project and what could happen there. But between the estimated net new job investment, how much is going into the building itself, some renovations, some new equipment, all those types of things, which are those early questions that we need to be asking about during that growth conversation. What could this look like? Breaking all those components down. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to sniff at $1 million.
Ben, you mentioned in that situation, being in front is critical. And I guess, obviously, Brian, you came from the CPA background. Bren, you're from the incentives background. So explain to me a little bit more why, because I'm coming from the tax background. So I don't care when somebody calls me. If I'm doing a cost seg study on it, it doesn't matter if they built the building a week ago, next year, or 3 years ago. I can still work with them. Why is that timing so critical on the location side of things?
Well, from the credits incentives location advisory side, so often there is actually a legal statute called a but-for clause in so many different states. Brian, you're well familiar with this in Illinois because they're very strict on the but-for clause in Illinois. But for the offer of incentives, the project would not move forward. So if the incentives help make the project happen is the key to that. And you have to prove that by saying, okay, we haven't made these key decisions. We haven't made the purchase agreement yet. We haven't signed the lease agreement. We haven't hired those employees. We haven't actually purchased or placed in service that equipment yet. We're waiting because we'd like to do it in this location, but we could do it in another location, whether that's outside the state, outside the county, outside of the city, or just down the street at another option. We have to be in front of those specific decisions so that we can have the leverage to be able to maximize the incentives.
Yeah, not to mention also with that, from a but-for standpoint, I think probably at least a dozen times I've seen companies and clients get tripped up. It may not be that they filed for a permit yet, right? But it could be that the company's CEO or marketing team was actually doing a site visit and sitting down with the local government just to get a better understanding of, hey, do we have enough available workforce? Is this the right place from a work-life balance? Is this where we want to be when we open up our next location, or if we're shifting operations? And I've had a couple instances where then as we've tried to move that project forward, they said, hey, by the way, the governor's already aware of this, or the mayor's already aware of this project. As a result, you're not going to be able to apply for these incentives because there's no more question of whether or not this project would not happen, right, without those incentives. So Illinois has a very strict one you have to sign off on. New Jersey actually has an attestation statement where you actually have to say that these incentives are the reason, and the CEO has to sign off on it. So when we evaluate incentive opportunities, we align with our clients, we're taking a look at when are all those major milestones happening so we can help them understand, here's the line in the sand. We don't want to go past that, or you don't want to get past that before we have a chance to sit down and have that initial conversation, or we need to get through an application, or we need to have approval prior to you actually completing that step for your expansion.
And if you start to work backwards in the timeline from that, if your decision is, hey, we really need to sign this purchase agreement probably by July, then if we start working backwards to say, okay, then let's work back 60 to 90 days, maybe even 120 days, depending on the state and all the compliance, the application process, if there's local bodies of government that you have to go through to try to get a resolution document that then unlocks the tool that is the incentive at the end of the day, we've got to make sure we're in front of all that. So oftentimes we like to say if we can be at least 60 to 90 days in front of those final decisions, which if you think about it, in a lot of these circumstances, if a business is moving forward, even if they've already identified a building, there's still a due diligence period that aligns very specifically with that. The challenge, again, is that oftentimes clients are not thinking, I should reach out to my CPA and ask them about what they think of this process. Usually and we joke with our CPA partners all the time, we're the last ones to find out about anything that our clients are doing because it's going to be asking that question, what happened last year? So if the CPAs can start to shift that mentality and start asking in that Q4 discussion question, not just what happened over the last year, but what could happen in the following year, that's when we can start positioning and say, well, our clients mentioned that they are looking at growth. Okay, great. That's when we need to be contacted because we can start following up on these next questions. But that trigger point, when growth conversations are starting to happen, we've got to get involved very quickly.
Those conversations illustrate something important. Sometimes the difference between finding $1 million opportunity and missing it entirely isn't technical knowledge. It's simply asking questions early enough. But once you've identified an opportunity, another challenge appears. How do you provide value when the issue falls outside your own expertise? I interviewed our next guest as he shared a perspective we think every CPA can relate to.
Let's maybe dive into a couple things. I don't want to talk too much about projects and opportunities, but let's dive into a couple ways that you've kind of been proactive, and within a client situation, you've been able to, because I know these are things, and I'm going to take a step back. I know these are things that, a lot of times you're in talking about tax planning and you're focused on your services and your products. How have you equipped yourself to make sure that you're always recognizing additional opportunity? I think that's an area where a lot of people struggle with. It's like, gosh, I have all these things to talk about. How am I supposed to identify these other things as well? What have you done to help yourself kind of get past that hurdle?
Honestly, one thing that's been hugely successful for me is not trying to do it myself. I put a lot of faith and trust in the team that I have at Yo and Yo. I think actually on one of the first Let's Talk Tax podcasts, Dave said it best, and it was something that resonated with me. In today's day and age, a CPA cannot be a one-stop shop for an ideal client. We get so fixated on deliverables, whether it's a tax return, tax planning, financial statement. We've got massive tax changes with OB3, the state of Michigan, where we are at. We have a lot of decoupling for the first time in a really long time. So there's a lot of different nuances going there. So for me, I try to not be a master of everything. I fully understand and I'm comfortable not being a R&D Section 41, know all the ins and outs. But I pride myself on knowing enough information to know when something is there, and then to have spent the time forging the relationship with like McGuire Sponsor, or whether it's another third party, whoever it is that we need to bring in to kind of assist, get us to the finish line. Could also be someone else, at a different office within Yo and Yo. But for me, it's able to get enough information to then turn around. A lot of times I go through you, Tim. We'll chat about what it is. We'll get it on a call, and we're able to go from there. So I think something that's been really successful for me is knowing enough to know when something is there and to escalate it to the next level just to see it. And that's something that I think the clients are really helpful for, because then I'm not trying to dance around credits and incentives or, international tax concerns. Those are not my strong suit. I certainly understand when they're there and kind of know where to move things. So something that's worked well for me is always knowing who the person to take an opportunity to is. More often than not, it's something that I can do, but when it goes into a specialty or a niche service, bring in the experts.
Yeah, and I think I look at it, trust is very important, obviously, and I think with a relationship like this, there's 3 phases of trust. There's trust between you and your client. There's trust between you and me, and then there's trust now between me and your client. There's this whole. Think about all the things that raise a lot of red flags for a CPA firms. Like, oh my gosh, I hold all the risk. I bear all the risk bringing someone into this relationship, and I think that's a barrier. I really do. I think it's a barrier with a lot of firms, and they're kind of like, you know what? I stay in my lane. I do what I do well. And I don't have to worry about anybody else messing up these relationships. So I completely understand that, and I've watched it. Think about when it started with McGuire Sponsor and Yo over the years. We started, probably 6 years ago, and it was just kind of this back and forth conversation. And then obviously I got introduced to Dave Jewell, and Dave and I had a very in-depth conversation, and you could tell it's like, can I trust you? And then it's let's sample a couple projects in here. Let's see how they do. And Zahir gives us the first project, cost seg, and I think all I got was cost segs from Zahir for a while. And then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, there's quality, there's service, the turnaround time's good. And I think that's what we had to connect, all those dots early on, for you all to think this is something we want to move forward with. And then it became this very strategic approach. We kind of dissected all the little ins and outs that everybody was comfortable with. And then when we got there, it was amazing to kind of see how things just start doing this. Because I think you guys were doing some of these services prior to us coming alongside you. And, it was one of those things where you had a couple that were doing some things that it was fine, and you knew you needed this service for your client. But we were able to connect in a way where it was like, hey, these are the areas that we see growth opportunity. This is our client base. Can you help us, and can we trust you? And it's been great ever since.
One of my favorite lines from that conversation was simple. Know enough to recognize the opportunity, then know who to call. That's a powerful shift. Instead of trying to be everything to everyone, the best advisors become exceptional connectors, bringing the right expertise to the table at the right time. And that leads naturally to our final clip. Because creating opportunities, building trusted relationships, and continuously growing your practice all begin with one thing: mindset.
We've been talking a lot internally about really a kind of a simple question, and it's who wants more? But in reality, that's not always a simple question, because it's not just, hey, if you want more, poof, it happens. It's earned. I know we've been talking about that a lot lately. Can you give us some insight there?
Yeah, at our team retreat this spring, we talked about how outcomes are earned. They don't just get wished into existence. You have to put forth effort in an intentional way. And that all starts with having a clear vision of what you want to accomplish. We started out the talk by discussing what happens when you get into the car and go on a road trip and you don't have a destination in mind. It's the same thing like navigating your career with no destination in mind. You're kind of just taking the next right step, but we don't ultimately have a grasp on whether or not we're headed in the right direction or not. So that was the concept that we wanted to land with our team members.
Especially in the accounting industry, I think that can be difficult, because as somebody who kind of grew up in the accounting industry, I know it was always you spend X number of years at associate, Y number of years at senior, then you get to manager, et cetera. And so I think it's easy for people to fall in that mindset of I'm waiting for the next step. I'm waiting for that promotion. I'm waiting for my life to come to me. How at McGuire Sponsor, with what you're doing, are you trying to change that mindset?
Well, I think it all comes back to the why. You want the next step in your career, but you have to understand why. And we boil that down to, we have to have a strong sense of purpose. And your purpose comes from 3 different sources. Neil Doshi was the author. I credit this to, not my brain. But Neil says that purpose comes from play, purpose, or potential. Your play being, I really genuinely enjoy the work that I get to do. Like most golfers, they enjoy the sport of golf, right? Easy example. Purpose being, I'm really driven by the mission of this organization. A lot of nonprofits start because the founder has a really strong tie to the mission or personal impact story that fuels the mission of the organization. And then potential being the third, where at your current place of work, you are able to achieve more of your potential. You're growing, you are expanding your skill sets, you are learning new things on a regular basis, and there's always somewhere more to go. And so it can't just be, I want that next promotion because that next title is the next logical step. It's, I want it because this is enriching my life because of one of those 3 sources of purpose.
Now, you mentioned golfers. And I know this happens to a lot of people, is you can start off with something that's fun and you can lose the fun. Mm-hmm. You can start off with potential and the potential turns into what you're doing. Do those drivers, do they change over time or do they flip for people, and how do you adjust if that play becomes no longer play?
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely a sliding scale. And usually I would say most of us have some combination of the 3. It's not just I'm drawing it from one bucket solely. I think it's a combination most of the time. And let's say season of life changes and maybe you're not in a growing season, so the potential volume's down, but you're just as passionate about the mission of the organization. And so that purpose might drive up because you are seeing that we're having a greater impact and you're truly inspired by the impact that you're having. Or you start to enjoy, maybe you get a promotion and you take on a different role that is more aligned to your strengths, and you are now genuinely enjoying the role because it's a better fit. So absolutely, those can fluctuate and change over time depending on circumstances and context.
As we wrapped up season 3, one theme kept surfacing: growth isn't accidental. It comes from asking better questions, staying curious about your client's business, surrounding yourself with trusted specialists, and intentionally investing in your own development. We'd like to thank all of our guests who joined us this spring and everyone who tuned in. If this episode sparked an idea or reminded you of a conversation you wanted to revisit, you'll find every full episode available wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Tax. We'll be back again next week with another special episode. New episodes will be released August 1st.